Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tom Hunter Pratt. I'm the Multimedia Specialist at the Institute of Child Nutrition. We're going to allow everyone a few minutes time to enter into the webinar, and I'm going to go over a couple of things and we'll get started. Again, welcome everyone. As you come in, you will all be in listen-only mode by default. If you have any questions, you can enter those into the Q&A box at any time. At the end of today's webinar, you will see a pop-up that comes up asking you to take a short survey. If you don't mind, go ahead and open that screen and take the survey after the webinar ends. Webinar certificate will be sent out after this webinar has completed, so I will send those out. So be looking for those in your email. And tomorrow you will receive a follow-up email with recording links to this webinar as well as a survey if you were unable to take the survey after this webinar ends. Again, if you have any questions, enter those in the Q&A box. We'll be happy to take your questions after each panelist is finished with their presentation. Thank you all for joining us today, and Lutina, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tom Hunter. Good afternoon. I'm Lutina Cochran, an Education and Training Specialist here with the Institute of Child Nutrition, and I would like to welcome you to the June School Nutrition Star webinar entitled It's a Virtual Thing, Tips and Strategies for Offering Virtual Training in Child Nutrition. For your reference, the topic covered in today's webinar falls under the key area Administration and the USDA Professional Standards Code 3000. The Institute of Child Nutrition, which is also known as ICN, launched the School Nutrition Star initiative to assist in meeting the unique training, technical assistance, and professional development needs of school nutrition professionals. The School Nutrition Star program offers a multitude of elements for enhancing program administration and operations. Some examples include face-to-face training workshops, virtual instructor-led trainings, webinars, and spotlight success stories. ICN collaborates with USDA to host monthly star webinars such as today to provide attendees with training, real-life strategies of program implementation, and best practices for use in action plans and/or goals. Training topics include free resources, and educational materials are also highlighted to assist school nutrition professionals with navigating through the enhanced responsibilities of school nutrition operations. For your reference, the Institute has created a website with all of these resources and materials specifically related to the webinars. You can find this information at theicn.org/star. You can also find a handout and some of the latest ICN resources or just more additional information at theicn.org. Thank you for joining today's webinar. So, in terms of the topic itself, face-to-face training has long been a primary source for professional development for many in the field. When there's a new policy or a best practice or the need for a refresher, many child nutrition professionals would pursue some sort of face-to-face training. However, COVID-19 has impacted our lives in various forms and disrupted what's known as normalcy. Social distancing has called for an immediate change in not only how we learn in a face-to-face format, but more so how we live our day-to-day lives. We've all had to adjust. So if you haven't already, please give yourself a pat on the back for continuing to strive for excellence in these untrodden territories. We truly understand we're all working in different facets of the country, and here at the Institute, we appreciate everything that you do to provide meals to our nation's children. And we just hope that today's webinar will provide you with another method for continuing the great work in the field through professional development. That being said, today's webinar will focus on good practices for meeting professional development needs through a virtual format, rather that be self-paced online courses or instructor-led online courses or other e-learning formats. It will emphasize three key topics: defining virtual training, strategies for converting face-to-face training into a virtual format, or so using what you have to create that resources, and then lastly, of course, but not least, virtual training in the field. details. This webinar will provide for not only the attendee who's interested in developing and providing virtual training to their staff, but it will also those individuals who may be searching for some form of online learning. At the end of this webinar, we hope that you will be able to recall some tips and strategies for learning and pursuing virtual training as an alternative to face-to-face training. Now, I'm so fortunate because I have three amazing panelists here to talk to us today about virtual training. First, we have Ms. Mary Barnes. Mary is an international expert in teacher professional development, online learning, instruction, curriculum development, and educational technology. She's won various awards for her commitment to providing quality teaching, research, and curriculum design, and has authored numerous books and studies on a multitude of related topics. Mary holds a BA in International Relations and Romance Languages from Boston College, an MS in Urban Planning, an MA in Latin American Studies from the University of Texas in Austin, and an EDM from Harvard University. Thank you so much for being here, Mary. Oh, sorry. Let's get back to the right screen. There we go. We also have Ms. Christine Harrison. She's a registered dietitian with a bachelor's degree in dietetics and a master's in public health. She worked as the nutrition training and outreach coordinator for the Massachusetts Department of Education. As a consultant, she has had experience designing and teaching online classes, creating interactive modules, and most recently working with the Institute of Child Nutrition to adapt and facilitate the virtual instructor-led trainings that we host. Thank you so much for being here, Christiane. And then lastly, but not least, we have Ms. Patty Delger. She's a registered dietitian and registered and licensed dietitian with well over 35 years of experience. She is the Iowa Teen Nutrition Co-Director of a USDA Teen Nutrition Grant. Patty works to support and improve healthy childcare environments through nutrition and education and training of childcare nutrition staff to plan and prepare healthy meals. Patty is committed to promoting lifelong healthy eating and physical activity in Iowa's children and youth. Thank you so much for being here, Patty. So we're definitely in great hands today, and I'm super excited to get started. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Mary to start us off for today. Thank you, Mary.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. It's great to be with you all. So I'm going to plunge right in. I have my presentation will really center on 5 questions from really simple to much more complex. Interesting. Okay. So the first really is, what is online learning? And I would have said that traditionally, typically in BC, before COVID, online learning really meant that over 80% of our content was delivered online. And it typically meant that there were no face-to-face meetings at all. And online learning before COVID was typically held in traditionally in a learning management system. Now, after COVID, with COVID, online learning really is any learning that occurs almost entirely online. So my second question, sorry, I'm having a little trouble advancing here. The second question is, what are some examples of online learning? And really, before I get into that, I just want to talk some terminology with you and talk about some sets of terms that are used often in distinction with one another or in opposition to one another. And so the first one is asynchronous versus synchronous. So right now, we're engaged in a synchronous learning activity, because if you're watching this right now at 2 p.m., this is live. But if you watch this afterwards, when it's recorded, you're engaged in asynchronous learning activity. So asynchronous is simply learning that is not real time versus learning that is real time. A second set of terms that are often used are cohort-based versus self-paced. So cohort-based are what most universities and schools have. So there's a group of students who are taking online courses together. It's like a class. Versus self-paced, where I may be taking an online course like a MOOC, which I'll talk about in a minute, but I'm doing it on my own. And the third set of terms is instructor-led versus self-paced. And again, instructor-led is what we'd expect. It's a teacher leading an online class versus again, self-paced where I'm taking something online and I'm doing it on my own. So I'm being, these terms in practice are not as dichotomous as I'm making them sound out to be here. For example, you can have an instructor-led cohort-based course where I do some things on my own and where some activities are synchronous and asynchronous. But the reason I reference them is because the research references them, and I'm going to be talking about the research in a moment. So examples of online learning, I'll just share 3 with you, and one we know very well, and this is the classic learning management system, which many of your institutions may have. This happens to be Canvas, but there's Moodle, there's Docebo, there's Blackboard. It's really an online classroom, and I've pointed out some areas here. There's information for the course instructor to author things. There's information for students. The course is typically organized by modules or by weeks. There's video, there's audio, there's discussions, there's multimedia, there's a lot of readings, and learning activities occur within this kind of walled garden, and they're often synchronous and asynchronous. A second type of online learning, which many of you may have heard about, especially those of you at universities, because it was supposed to replace the university, and that's a massively open online course, a MOOC. And a MOOC is also used as a particular kind of platform that is very asynchronous. So MOOCs look like learning management systems because they have assessments, they have discussion forums, though those are often asynchronous. They have videos, they have readings. There's 2 big differences. Number one is the MOOC typically does not have a live instructor. I say typically, there are exceptions. Often if there is an instructor, it's like this guy on the video. It's an instructor that comes in over a recorded video. And secondly, a learning management system may host 20 or 100 students, but a MOOC is really made to host thousands of students, and because it's open. And there is why you have the asynchronicity. And third, which many of us have come to equate with online learning, and that is a web conferencing system like Zoom that we're using now that has breakout rooms, that is instructor-led. It allows for synchronous cohort-based instruction. Zoom is a terrific system which we're using, and these move from simple platforms like Zoom to really powerful platforms like Adobe Connect that allows for thousands of people to be in a webinar. At the same time, it has multiple chats, multiple polls, multiple features, multiple presenters. So I'm going to move on. Another question is really, what are the benefits of online learning? And the benefits are manifold, but they really boil down to a couple of things. Number one is access. Access, as we've seen during COVID, to continuous learning. Number two is cost. Once you build your online learning system, you can add learners at really marginal cost. And the third is continuity, just kind of is convenience, really convenience of the learning experiences. We've all learned we can all take courses and teach courses in our pajamas. Online learning is a really good complement to face-to-face learning, which is why blended learning, a combination of online and face-to-face, is so powerful. And the jury is still out on whether online learning is a good supplement, in other words, a replacement to face-to-face learning. So what works in online learning? And let me go back to these terms that I talked about earlier. So this is what the research tells us. And I will say there's not a lot of research on online learning, surprisingly, after 2 decades. Synchronous is better than asynchronous. Cohort-based is better than self-paced. Instructor-led is better than self-paced. And course completion rates are very, very linked to satisfaction with the online instructor. So those of us in education, those of us in life know that good teaching matters. And I would say that good teaching matters even more in an online course. And why is that? Because good teaching and active teaching in online learning reduce attrition. And attrition is the biggest problem that online courses and programs face, as I'm sure many of you have experienced. So what is attrition? Attrition is essentially dropping out of your online course, or not completing your work, or dropping in and out, but such that it actually impedes your ability to finish the course. And in fact, we actually don't know what attrition rates are in online learning, except that we know they're much higher than in face-to-face learning. So conservative estimates say that attrition rates are typically around 40%. So 60% of our students complete an online course. Other estimates say it's half and half, 50% complete, 50% don't complete. Other estimates say no, 60% of our students will not complete an online course. And when it comes to MOOCs, the attrition rates are about 95%. So what does this really mean? So if we look, for example, here's an online course of 20 students. And here's what the course looks like if I have a 40% attrition rate. There's a 50% attrition rate, and here's a 60% attrition rate. And as you can start to see, as we lose students, we lose a lot. We lose a diversity of ideas, we lose a support system, we lose quality. Attrition really calls into question the quality, the cost effectiveness, and the whole reason for being of an online course. So the big question, and this is really the remainder of my presentation, is how can we reduce attrition or really increase completion of online courses? And essentially, we can do three things. And the first really is to pay attention to course design and really design intentionally for an online medium. So what does that mean exactly? I'll go back to my terms. We want to design courses that are mostly synchronous, that are cohort-based, that are facilitator-led. We want to create courses that are high touch. A big reason that students drop out of online courses because they feel like they're alone. So having students work together, work with each other in pairs and teams, employ multiple ways of learning so that students are learning from each other, from their instructor, from activities, from content. We really want to give online courses a lot of structure and support so students are less likely, students, whether they're adults or teenagers, are less likely to drop out. And we want to use a variety of content, from kind of flat content like reading to much more interactive content like video, like audio, multimedia, simulations, etc. The second thing we want to do is really, again, to reduce attrition and increase satisfaction with the online experience, is really to prepare our instructors to teach online, and not just to use technology, but learn how to teach through technology. So I'm going to use an analogy that will send many of you scrambling to Google to figure out what I'm talking about. And this, obviously, I date myself, but I like to say that online learning, if you know Ginger Rogers, she danced with Fred Astaire. And he always got more credit. And she said that she did everything Fred Astaire did, except she did it backwards and in high heels. And an online instructor does everything that a face-to-face instructor does, except has to do it through technology, which makes it much more difficult. So we see that the skills that an online instructor needs are similar to the skills of a face-to-face instructor, content, assessment, etc. But there are other areas particular to online learning. Online instructors have to figure out how to teach their content and pedagogy through technology. They have to figure out how to manage and support online learners. And I think most challenging is they have to figure out how to establish a sense of online presence. And by presence, we mean not just showing up in Zoom, although that helps a lot, but presence really is about active facilitation of the learner, helping the learner understand the content, the learning experience, really helping the online learner to be integrated with the content, with the learning experience, and with one another. And finally, we really need to help our students be successful online learners. I think what we've learned through COVID is they are not the digital natives we thought they were. So I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about technology literacy and digital inclusion, because I think this is a term that we've really managed to reduce to a point where it no longer has any meaning. So when we talk about technology literacy or digital inclusion, we're really talking about 4 sets of skills. And the first is operational. Do I know how to use the hardware? Do I know how to use the software? The second is informational. Do I know how to access information, use this information, and process this information? And I would say evaluate this information. The third is really strategic. Do I know how to use technology to set goals and maintain my goals, attain my goals over time? And the fourth is much more difficult, and this is what we refer to in the research as kind of formal skills. This is really productive, using technology for formal, productive, complex tasks, such as taking online courses or going to absorbing information that may be complex, for example, readings or research from government sites, from university sites, anything that increases our knowledge capital. So what we know is that when we've talked about students being digital natives, what we've really talked about is their ability to use technology, and we've kind of ignored everything else. And what we see is students are really good at the operational part, although not all of it, as you may have found. A lot of students have had trouble with learning management systems. As the informational, strategic, and especially formal, they get less good at this. It becomes increasingly difficult. And we've seen that digital inequalities actually reproduce structural inequalities that we see in society. So for example, students who come from poor families tend to use technology more for education versus academic purposes. We see that students who come from socioeconomically deprived families are less likely to use technology for informational, strategic, or formal purposes. So as online instructors, one of the things we have to do is really help our students understand how to use the technology, but understand how to use it to gather information and use this information and evaluate this information for their own purposes. We have to help students use technology strategically. So how do I set a goal? How do I maintain a schedule? How do I self-regulate so that I attain my goal? How do I block out distractions? And for formal purposes, you know, how do I complete an online course of study? How do I make a schedule? How do I ask for help when I need it? And a tricky area is how do I engage in high literacy practices, things like reading and writing online. So I'm going to conclude here and thank you all very much. I do a lot of writing on online learning, and a great resource, one place I write for is called eLearning Industry, and it's just a terrific resource for anyone who's interested in online learning, and they always welcome publications. I also write a lot about online learning for the Global Partnership for Education, and I tweet a lot about it as well through my Twitter account. So I'm going to I'm going to stop here and actually see what kinds of questions anybody might have for me. I know I kind of threw a lot of information at you all. And as I'm waiting for your questions, I'm going to give you a question that I often hear from people, and that is, really, do you have to do all these things, Mary, that you've just suggested? And I would say the answer is absolutely yes. We often sometimes think that if we build our technology system, we have our online learning system, but the technology is only one small part of online learning. The bigger challenges that we face in online learning are often more about human interactions and human behavior in an online system, and institutional behaviors and institutional practices in an online system. So the first question I have here is from Kevin. What would you say is the difference between an online course, such as university courses, and professional development courses offered by companies? You know, an online course offered by a university system would be longer. It'll be several months long. It'll have a lot more structure built into it because you have a series of assignments and readings and activities that you have to do. The nice thing about a university course is that somebody in that student's family has paid for it. So there's an incentive to complete it. So there's kind of a built-in structure there for the student to complete the course. So in terms of professional development, which I do a lot of, but not necessarily for companies, those courses tend to be a lot shorter. They tend to be a lot more open. They rely a lot on the goodwill of whoever's participating in the online course. Or in my area, I work with teachers, and we kind of rely on teachers to complete their online courses. We often assume that that adults have kind of better self-regulation than students do, but that's not often true. So we tend to provide less supports for these adults. So I'll stop here, and Kevin, if I haven't answered your question, feel free to circle back at me. Do you have any suggestions? A second question from Clay. Do you have any suggestions on how to engage students that are socioeconomically disadvantaged and less inclined to attend online training? You know, I think, unfortunately, in our country, education attainment is highly, highly linked to socioeconomic background. So I would say the things we have to do for our learners, and particularly learners that may not have had an online experience before. Wealthy kids in wealthy areas, like in wealthy suburbs, they often take, MOOCs, or I want to take Arabic. They may have engaged in online learning, but I think we want to provide a lot of supports for the kinds of students that you mentioned, Clay. So for example, just working with students to set up a schedule is so important. Having students have a buddy, so that I'm not alone doing this work, doing office hours, checking in every day, really encouraging help seeking. A lot of kids get embarrassed that they don't know what they're doing, they're getting lost, and they won't ask for help. Reaching out and making sure that, calling kids and saying, hey, how are you doing? I haven't seen you online for a while. And I think, working on kind of literacy strategies, one of the things we have to do is really help people read online. None of us read well online anymore. And this is particularly true with younger students, although it's true of all of us. So really helping students figure out ways to read online and absorb information. I'll move on. This is from Janet. What resources are available for students that don't have access to online courses, but they really want to learn? That's an interesting question. Off the top of my head, I would say print resources. I work internationally, so in places like sub-Saharan Africa, we often offer continuous education to students and teachers through radio and interactive radio, which is something my organization does. We've seen television have an amazing educational renaissance because TV has proven to be actually more accessible to most of the world's learners than online learning. Mobile learning, but mobile learning has a lot of interaction costs. As we know, it's really difficult to read online. And, I think in terms of students right now, what's been hard is kids who don't have access to technology. Typically, they've gone to a library or to parks or to some shared space, but all those are closed down right now.
Hi, Mary.
Uh-huh.
Okay, we're down to about a
Okay.
minute left.
Okay. Research on students where English is their second language. I don't know, Everlidis, exactly. I will say that, online learning poses particular challenges to students who are ELL, because everything is a literacy test, essentially, and it's a literacy test in a new language. But I'm sure that exists, but I don't have that information. And then finally, what are tips for students in rural areas that don't have access or transportation for technology? Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, we've seen a lot about the digital divide here in the United States. We are seeing interesting things. I mean, this is a policy issue. Unfortunately, the FCC in the last 2 years has made it much more difficult for students to get online access in rural areas. That was one of the policies that was actually rolled back in the last 2 years. We've seen school buses outfitted with modems that drive through rural areas. We have seen companies like Verizon and other ISPs actually lower their prices, zero rate data, lift data caps. We have seen them, but what we really need is connectivity and a device in every single student's household. But the good thing about COVID, and I'll end here, is that I think COVID has started to spur those conversations about digital, not just digital equity, but usage equity that I was talking about. So I'll end here because I want to turn this over to my colleague, Kristan, and thank you all very much.
Hi, thanks, Mary, for that really informative presentation. I learned a lot, and hopefully this is a good transition for some really practical ideas of doing some of the things that Mary talked about. So I've been helping ICN change some of their face-to-face training and adapting that to a virtual instructor-led training that Mary talked about. And so they asked if I would share some lessons learned, also just some practical suggestions and examples about types of interactives that have worked well so that we can really keep participants engaged. So I want to start with the questions that we might think about as we start this transition from our face-to-face content to the virtual led training. A lot of time goes into those face-to-face trainings. They're not going to be exactly the same, right? And a lot of the activities that we have will have to be changed. So I think going through your objectives and just making sure that you're still staying in line with those objectives is a good way to stay true to that face-to-face content. Next, how will you know if participants are engaged in learning? And we found that a frequent use of a mixture of long and short interactions, even if it's just a touch base with a yes or no, thumbs up, thumbs down, that just makes sure that they're still with you, they're there. Because as Mary said, sometimes people will sign in and then they're not there. They don't turn on their videos, and it's hard to know if they're really, really with you. So what are the best types of activities that we've used? And I'm just going to give mostly a lot of examples of how you can do types of interactives. We're going to be talking about using the breakout room. And these are all things that you can use with Zoom and PowerPoint. So we're keeping it really simple that anyone can do. And then something we call Think Share, and I'll give some examples of that. To create interactives with the yes, no button or thumbs up, thumbs down. And those are very easy to find in Zoom and very easy to use. And then finally, using multiple choice. The last thing to think about is whether you need a moderator, and that's a person that is also kind of a co-instructor with you. They help with the technology part, and I think it's really helpful because it helps with transitions. They can help put people right into breakout rooms. They can help monitor your chat box because it is hard to keep up with that chat box as you're also being the instructor. So let's talk about these types of activities. And the first is the breakout rooms, and they're really useful because it kind of gives some face-to-face time with the participants so they don't feel so alone in that learning process. When you put people into breakout rooms, you can either have them be in the same groups with the same people every time, or you can mix it up every time. And so it really depends on what your goal is. I've used both of those. So if you want them to be exposed to lots of people, then I change it up every time. But if you want kind of a team, and this is also helpful if you want to do some fun games where you would just have people, they know what team they're on, and you can name them like apples or oranges, and then you just say, okay, this is a question for apples, right? It kind of narrows down the people who you want to answer that question. So you can have each group answer the same question. You can have each group answer different questions, or you can do some type of application of material. And I'll give you an example where we had them come up with a slogan. Just a few things that you want to be careful of with breakout rooms is once they go to the breakout room, they will not be able to see slides anymore. So you want to make sure that you give really clear instructions before they go into the breakout room. Give an example. Also give a visual prompt on the slide and also in the chat box because they will be able to see that chat box. Also, as far as the number in each group, it will vary, but I always think add a few more than what you would do face-to-face because there's some of those people that aren't really there. And so you don't want participants to go into a group of 5 or 6 and there's only 1 or 2 people there. Also be clear about how you want them to report back. All right, so is there going to be a spokesperson that reports back to the main group? So here's some examples of the breakout rooms that we've done. So this is one that's it's an icebreaker. I like to do a breakout room as an icebreaker because again, it gets people talking with others. It helps them feel like they're in a more intimate setting, and it also lets them practice some of these skills of unmuting, of using the chat box. And this is one where they're introducing themselves and then all discussing the same question. I just added this yesterday because we did it for the first time and I wasn't sure how it was going to work out, but it's a variation of breakout rooms with the same questions, but we did speed breakouts where they had a question, they went in for just 2 minutes, they came back, gave us their top 1 or 2 kind of summary points, and then they went right back into breakout rooms for 2 more minutes. And so we did that. There's these 5 questions, and I worried they might be overwhelmed, but they really liked it, and they had a lot of discussion, and I think it we did it at the end. I think it really helped kind of give some energy back to the group because they knew they had to really be coming up with answers quickly. This is an example of a breakout room where you're kind of talking here about cross-contamination, but each room is talking about a different aspect of cross-contamination or cross-contact. So then you come back together and everyone shares, and it will be a little bit different, but all on that same topic. This next is the example of an application activity. Here we're talking about food safety, types of personal hygiene. And after we reviewed that material, we had each breakout room assigned one topic, and they were supposed to come up with a slogan about that topic. So we gave an example, wearing neat clothes that are crisp and clean, let the world know you practice good personal hygiene. So it gives them an idea of something fun. And this is a really, people really like it. It's creative. They are reviewing that material, but they're doing something fun with it. And that has been really successful. The think share activities are where you give them a little bit of time to create their own list of answers and then share a couple of them. So you would give them 30 seconds to a minute, usually have them have a piece of paper with them. This works best when there's a list of answers or multiple answers, but a fairly simple question that you wouldn't want to put into a discussion, breakout room. And then they can either put it in the chat box or unmute their mic and share. So here's an example, again, from food safety. On a piece of paper, write down all the times that it is important to wash your hands. So you give them 30 seconds. I like to go to the whiteboard and then type out the answers as they come in through the chat box or as they unmute. And this is a great place, again, to have a moderator because they are going to help you not miss anything. Then we have the yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down. You can see here what they look like on Zoom. And this is a good way to review material or apply information that you've given them. So this is a really simple review activity, true, false. So you ask a question, they say yes or no, you give the answer. All right, so that's a really simple review. This one is an application. You go over cooking temperatures. So here we have a pork roast is registering 140 degrees, and you say, thumbs up if you think that temperature should be higher. Then they do the clapping or applause if they think it's the right temperature. And then if they think that the correct temperature is passed, they give a thumbs down. You reveal the answer in here. They should have given you a thumbs up. Now, I don't wait for everybody to reply because that's not going to happen if you wait forever, but kind of give a little bit of time to see those responses coming in to see if, again, they're getting the information. Another good use of this is scenarios or case studies that can be a review of what they've done, and they can just simple yes, no, and then you can also add a little more information at this point if you want to. Next is a little bit of a busy slide, but there's they needed all this information to actually work out whether this yogurt is creditable. So you review how you figure that out using the yogurt sugar limit table, and then again, a minute or so to have them come up with their answer, and then you reveal the correct answer. And then moving on, multiple choice or short answers. This is where they would just use the chat box to give you the answers. Here you can apply learned materials, review a lesson, and this is a fun time to use teams, again, if you're staying in those same groups for your breakout rooms. So here's a few examples. We've used this. Here is again, a kind of a scenario. They have A through E, and here we have 2 correct answers, so you would wait to see in the chat box what answers people are putting. Then you reveal the answers. Here's one where they're trying to figure out if brand A or generic cereal is a better bargain. You show them how to do that calculation, and then they can write in brand A or generic into the chat box, and then you reveal. Here is using numbers rather than letters, where they have to figure out where each of the food items would be placed on the refrigerator shelves. And then here you have a little, they fly into the right places as you go through each one of those. We've used a Jeopardy type game a few times. And again, we've gone back to those breakout rooms that have stayed together. That's their team. This is a really fun way to review. And even at the end, you know, a 4-hour presentation, they kind of come alive and have a fun time with their group answering. We do just go through like all the 100s, all the 200s, rather than having them pick the question, just so it doesn't, you know, get too long. But it's a typical Jeopardy where you read the question and then everyone in that team only, you know, it says A, B, C, or D, then you reveal the answer. And if your moderator wants to keep score, then it's a fun way to encourage learning and participation. All right, so the final questions after we've kind of converted, you know, our face-to-face into our slides for virtual training, I like to go through all the slides all at once and say, you know, think, are there a variety of activities? You don't want the same activity over and over again back to back, right? You want a variety to keep, you know, keep them on the toes, keep them engaged. Also, I try to see if the pacing's right. And by that, I mean, mostly, are there really long stretches where the instructor's just lecturing? You're going to lose people. So, you know, should I just put even, you know, a true-false question, a thumbs up, thumbs down, just something, again, to get, to interact with the participants. And then go back to your objectives for the face-to-face training and just make sure that you have met those objectives of that training. So hopefully that was helpful with a few practical examples of things that we've been using. So if there's any questions that anybody has, and I don't know if there's, you know, a perfect, and maybe Mary knows about the research, but what we've kind of done is a little bit of trial and errors. We're all going through this together, and we'll try something, and if it doesn't work, then, you know, try something else. Okay, so one question just left. And, oh, here we go. Okay, so can you say more about the Jeopardy type game functions? All right, so the way you have it is it's just a regular PowerPoint presentation, but what you do is you hyperlink. So from the 100, you could just hyperlink that number to the slide that corresponds with that question. Then you hyperlink that to the slide where the answer is, and then you hyperlink that back to your Jeopardy game. Where can you go to learn how to use these features? So Zoom has a lot of online tutorials that you can go to. That's really easy to use. Yeah, so in the Jeopardy game, you just do A, B, C, or D in the chat box, and usually we say if anybody on the team gets the correct answer, we'll give them credit for it. But you can set it up however you want. But it is a fun way to do that.
Kristen.
Yeah, are we time?
About one more question.
Okay. Will there be slides? I don't know the answer to that. So the ideal number of breakout groups, we usually do around 5, and that seems to work pretty well, 5 to 6. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this on to Patty, because I know she has some great things for you to hear too. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kristen. Boy, I learned a lot. I'm going to integrate a lot of those strategies, I think, into my Zoom meetings. So thank you so much for that. So I'm Patty Delger at the Iowa Department of Education. I'm going to address the question, what does virtual training look like in the field of child nutrition users? I'll provide an overview of Iowa's online course development for the Child and Adult Care Food Program, or CACFP, made possible through a USDA Team Nutrition grant. I'll also present a few strategies for ensuring participant success to help you as you implement virtual training in schools or other child nutrition programs. So we contracted with Iowa Public Television, their partner agency, to develop Iowa Learning Online Professional Development on a Moodle platform, or ilopd.gov for short. The modules were designed for childcare to gain knowledge in supporting healthy environments. They are self-paced. They are free. They create their own ID and password login to get started in the courses, and they can receive a certificate of completion at the end of each module if they answer the review questions with at least 80% correct. So they are kind of graded and challenged to complete all of the objectives before they get their certificate. Here you see the 9 CACFP online training modules that we have developed through Team Nutrition over the past few years. They credit for 1 CACFP training hour, all with the exception of the Healthy Menu Makeover, which credits for 4 because of the time it takes to complete it. And there is a quiz and a Healthy Menu Makeover at the end that they have to complete. They can be completed in multiple sittings, which you can imagine for childcare staff, that's very attractive to them since they're so busy caring for children. And we, about 3,500 certificates are earned annually. So it continues to be a popular way of learning with our childcare providers in Iowa. In writing the 2017 Team Nutrition Grant, we asked CACFP staff to take a needs assessment to let us know if they access the online modules and what type of training they prefer. The online modules was ranked the highest, as you can see, in the type of training preferred by centers and home sponsors. And face-to-face is a close second there with the home providers, which remain vitally important during non-COVID time for sure, and whenever possible. So that needs assessment supported the development of more training through online. The timeline took about 7 months to develop the latest 2 modules, Healthy Menu Makeover and Healthy Food Purchasing. We contracted with a nutritionist who had writing experience as the course author, and she worked closely with the instructional designer and with CACFP and Team Nutrition staff. We contracted with Iowa Public Television to provide consultation on adult learners, which is not our expertise, but is their expertise, developing the instructional design, incorporating assessment quiz items and the certification process. And as a team, we met regularly to develop the modules. To give you a little idea of cost, the project budget was broken down here. For 2 modules. Media design and online course production was at $7,000. Iowa Public Television was our contracted company. The video production in a local childcare was at $2,000. The nutritionist, based on an hourly rate, was $3,500, and a pilot with 10 CACFP participants at $100 each for 1,000 brings the total to $13,500. So that pilot was so valuable. They gave us a lot of feedback, and we made changes as needed. We worked closely with that instructional designer. They were helpful in kind of leading our work to make it relevant and practical to our CACFP audience. Some suggested learning principles are listed here. The learner should see the immediate relevance to their course, to their work. The content should be practical and connected with their daily job tasks. That's important to keep in mind. The content needs to take into account the experience and prior knowledge so that you know that they've gained new knowledge and new skills for their work. And it should be flexible and allow that learner to have some control and extend their learning to keep them engaged. So the strategies used in the course development, they can take these courses anytime, anywhere, on any type of device. That was important to our audience. We had a discussion board at the end of each of the courses that allowed the providers to share and reflect with others. They love to be engaged and talk with one another and share their experiences. Each course includes many links and additional information and resources. The quiz questions are graded and are connected to the core learning objectives. And the course gives them corrective feedback on incorrect answers of why they were wrong. And we also included some best practices from local childcare, testimonials, some videos, photos were included. And of course, the course meets online accessibility. This is a snapshot of the Healthy Menu Makeover quiz. And you will see that at the end of that module, they need to create a five-day menu with healthy choices. And the best options gives them full credit, which in this case would be the fresh pineapple. A good choice gives them 50% score, and the poor menu item gives them nothing. So the learner must earn 80% or higher on the quiz in order to receive their certificate. So we learned from the needs assessment that providers wanted a way to apply their learning and to connect and share with others. So that's when the blog was created with questions for them to share with others. And they can reply to, comment on another person's comment, or they can create their own, or they can opt out of this part as well. The course developer receives the blog discussion so they can kind of monitor it a little bit and keep it productive. And shown here at the very bottom is one such comment. We get a lot of blogging. I think whole grains, gardening, picky eaters are probably our most popular ones, and they learn from each other. So here's a list of a few suggested strategies for ensuring participant success with virtual training using an instructional design process that helps incorporate that critical thinking and problem solving. I know as a CACFP staff, we didn't excel at that, and we needed that guidance in their instruction to help us through that process. If you take a current face-to-face training and modify it into virtual, those steps are important. We used a team approach, and we used a consistent team members, and we got more efficient as we went along. The needs assessment really helped drive what we were teaching about, so it's a great place to start. And incorporating assessment on quiz items to test their knowledge helps us know they get DHS credit for these modules, so we wanted to be sure they were getting the material and learning new skills along the way. And the pilot process fine-tuned the modules, like I said, gave us valuable feedback. And lastly, that discussion board is a big hit. They like that peer-to-peer learning, and it keeps the learners connected and engaged. So if you're interested in accessing Iowa CACFP modules, for ideas as you begin implementing virtual training, go to ilopd.iowa.gov and create your account. It's free. You're welcome to explore any course that's there just to see how it was generated and some of the ideas if you'd like. So thank you. That is it. That's my contact. And I am happy to take any questions at this time as well. What procedure do you have in place for those participants that don't obtain 80% accuracy? That's a good question. We have tech support that they can contact, and sometimes I check with them to see their process. There's a demographic survey that we also is required before they get their certificate. Maybe that's why they didn't get it. We could reset them. Not very often do we have to reset them to start all over again, but we're willing to do that. And then they know I have to really, progress and learn and get my answers correct. How do you set up a training module to incorporate a quiz and scoring mechanism? Like we did, it was on the Moodle platform, and we did have assistance with that. So it wasn't our expertise, but maybe start with your state agency that they could help lead you to a partner that can assist in that area. What tools did we use to gather information on our needs assessment? We actually used just a Google survey, and sent it out and gathered all their feedback from that. And was it an online quiz or specific software? I guess just answering that, it was just Google. It was just the survey that you have free And how best do you tailor content to take into account a wide range of learners' prior knowledge? That's a very good question. Again, we used a little bit from our past trainings, our face-to-face trainings and evaluation. So we tried to determine where they were at in some of the new information like whole grains and ounce equivalents and some of those new things that's a new skill. So we went from there. And maybe
Patty,
one more question.
we have about time for one more question.
Okay, one more question. Can you show the link to where you can find those courses again? I think I can go. Can I go back? I can't go back. It's ilopd.iowa.gov. So it's Iowa Learning Online Professional Development. So take a peek and see what you think. Thank you so much for your time. I'll turn it back to you, Lucina.
Okay, let's try that again. Thank you all so much for being here on today and just talking to the attendees about all this great information about virtual training. One thing that I will like to say is that as we walk away from this particular webinar today, I encourage you to create a plan for how you would like to use this information. Rather that be some type of action plan that focuses on steps or of how you want to put the information out there or implement the information, or something as simple as an apply in 3, where you look at what are 3 things you learned today, how will you apply this information, and then when will you apply it. So basically establishing some type of plan that can help you to take what all you learned today and then of course go out and implement it in your particular role. With that being said, let's see if it's going to allow me to advance to the next slide, and it did. We want to, again, thank you so much for attending this webinar on today. We know that there are quite a few questions that were out there that we weren't able to get to. However, we don't want to leave you empty-handed, so definitely check out our website, but most importantly, take a moment to write down our help desk email address. That's helpdesk@vicn.org. Email those questions to us, and we will definitely do our best to answer them. Also, if you have any additional information or any additional questions that you want to share regarding the content or the topic or just any other child nutrition questions, please feel free to email us at our help desk. And without further ado, I definitely want to thank you for being here on today, and this will conclude our webinar. Thank you.